Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin Sinise.
And I'm David Atwell.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 57, Let's See What's Out There. We'll start off with some Star Trek news.
And then we'll get into our audience feedback section right after our main topic, Let's See What's Out There. We're kicking off a series on Star Trek The Next Generation's 35th anniversary. Stay with us. Well, guys, here is our second episode this week.
Yeah.
Woohoo! This is crazy.
Let's see what this Galaxy-class podcast can do.
Indeed.
He had to get it in. He wanted that to be the title of the episode, which would have been good. But it's not our first episode, so, we know. But I'll tell you, this is a new episode. We are kind of having our saucer separation, which I think is appropriate, given that we're talking about Encounter on Farpoint.
Print out all decks.
Print out all decks. So I don't know if I guess we're in the saucer section. We were in the Star Drive last episode. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But for those of you who were not with us last episode, we are now splitting the episodes up so that we have 2 episodes a week. We're doing basically similar content. The first episode is our review episode. We also are starting to do Star Trek trivia on that show. You'll hear that show on the weekends. And then early to midweek, you're going to be hearing this show, the main show, which is the Gospel According to Star Trek show, where we do the news and audience feedback that you're used to, as well as our main topic. What used to be our main topic on the longer show. So I hope everybody enjoys the format, and we're excited for it. And I think that means it's time to get into some Star Trek news.
Yeah.
It is indeed.
There's only really one piece of Star Trek news, and that is Star Trek all year!
That's right. At least through July 7th. We know that for sure.
Yeah, and doing any sort of math on it at all, there's more than enough Star Trek either confirmed or expected to last us all 52 weeks of 2022.
Really? You think so?
I think so. I did the math on it. If we're talking about 10 episodes of every show that has been confirmed to have a season coming out this year, and 20 episodes of Prodigy, that takes us all the way through the end of the year with, I think, one to spare.
Well, but we only have 10 episodes of Prodigy left after
I'm taking that into account.
Yeah.
Yep. So we know Prodigy is, so to sort of lay it all out here, we know Prodigy is taking us through February 3rd. We knew that before. Right. We also know that Discovery is coming back and taking us through the end of February, and then and we knew that before. What we know now is that Picard is coming in March 3rd. We expected that, and running through the end of April. And then the first episode of Strange New Worlds is airing on the 5th of May. And yeah.
Concurrently with the last episode of Picard season 1. So you're skipping over some things. We've got some overlapping episodes here. The last episode of Discovery season 4 will be the 10th of March. So we have 2 episodes of Picard season 2 that are airing concurrently with Discovery.
Well, has that been confirmed? Because Discovery will only have 3 more episodes after it comes back from the break. So it won't need...
No, Discovery has 13 episodes this season.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Then it won't be able to be done on the 10th of March. It'll have to be the 17th of March.
That's right. Oh, I misspoke.
Okay.
No,
all right.
I misread. I was reading. That's right. Discovery goes through the 17th of March.
Okay.
And so Discovery season 4 episode 13 and Picard season 2 episode 3 will air the same day.
Gotcha.
We'll have 3 concurrent. The first 3 Picard episodes of season 2 are going to air concurrently with the last 3 episodes of Discovery season 4.
Right. And Mike, I think you...
Except on a Tuesday.
It's on a Thursday.
On a full moon.
No, it's on a Thursday.
The Paramount Plus release schedule for Star Trek is as complicated as Fizbin.
Right. Yes. Yep. And Mike, you had a news item about Picard in particular.
Yes, I mean,
we didn't finish. We didn't finish what we were talking about.
Well, as scintillating as laying down the 52 weeks of Star Trek is,
I think we're going to have a 6-week break. I think we're going to... Strange New Worlds ends on July 7th.
Yes.
And I think that Lower Decks season 3 is going to start on August 18th.
I agree, but I think Prodigy episodes 11 through 15 are going to be in that 6-week break.
Oh, okay.
Makes
okay.
good sense to
But
me.
even at
yeah.
that, you get well, okay. That's possible.
Yep.
That's possible.
And that might just be enough to tell. Now, I remember in 2019, back in the before times, when there were going to be something like 8 consecutive weeks of new Star Trek, and other podcasts and blogs were all excited about. We've never had this much new weekly Star Trek since the 90s or the early and so if you tell somebody, hey, look, sign up for Paramount Plus, you got 52 weeks of new Star Trek to look forward to. I mean, I dreamed about that when I was a teenager. I wish there was just a Star Trek channel,
Yeah.
Well,
there is on
Paramount
Pluto.
Plus has that too, actually, where aside from the releases, you can actually just tune in a Star Trek channel on Paramount Plus.
That's true.
And
you can. I think you can do the same on Pluto TV.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but yeah, I could see that being again, I've not watched maybe but one other thing on Paramount Plus ever in the 2 years I've had the thing. So I can see that convincing a lot of Star Trek fans.
Was it the Paw Patrol movie?
No, it was actually I watched half of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay.
I was going to rewatch that.
Oh, hey, there you go. There you go.
So there is other good stuff. I want to watch The Quiet Place 2. I haven't seen that yet. There's other stuff I want to watch, but
Yeah, there's too much Star Trek.
I don't
have time to watch. I don't have time to watch anything else. I'm always watching Star Trek.
But yeah, so I agree with you that I think that August 18th is probably when Lower Deck Season 3 is going to start. It matches up with last year really well. And then we're probably going to see the end of Prodigy and the beginning of Discovery Season 5 at the end of this year.
I don't think we're going to get Disco 5 at the end of
I think we're going to get the first, maybe the first couple episodes. I don't think we're going to get the whole thing.
No, I think we're going to get it next year. But we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. It's possible.
In either way.
Well, I don't know. They did 3 and 4
in our wrap-up episode.
I don't think they've
even.
I don't think they've even begun shooting 5. So I don't know if they'd be ready. But
I
maybe.
I think they already started shooting it, but I'm not sure.
Did they?
The bottom line is
just announced the renewal.
Almost every week this year, if not actually every week this year, we are going to see a new episode of Star Trek on Thursdays. Which is it's a stellar time to be a Star Trek fan.
It is.
Pun completely intended.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and on March 3rd, March 3rd, as you said, Picard Season 2 will start. And just today, the day as we're recording, on January 21st, Paramount released the official trailer for Picard Season 2.
Yeah.
The full-length trailer. And it's exciting. And I don't know, Kevin, did you end up deciding to watch it or not?
I have not watched it yet.
Okay, well...
If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I don't like spoilers, and I try to stay away from trailers before things come out, so I haven't watched it. But
I'll just say I don't think there's anything spoilery in it if you know some news about the show. But it does set the tone, and it looks like it's going to be exciting and interesting. And actually, in some scenes where it's set in our world, it looks a lot like a procedural you might see on CBS, which is kind of interesting. But it looks like it's going to be a fascinating show. So we shall see.
We shall see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I mean, I know the big players who are returning. Spoiler alert, which is, everybody knows. I mean, Guinan was the first one that we knew was coming back because I mean, Patrick Stewart invited Whoopi Goldberg to be on Season 2 on The View. So but then of course Q and the Borg Queen.
Yep.
So how exactly we don't know, but
it's interesting that Whoopi Goldberg is probably the last person we've actually seen in the role, given the fact that she was the first one we knew about. I don't think we've seen any footage or shots of her in the role before this trailer. So
that's right.
That's
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. I mean, I'm looking forward to this year.
Yeah.
Of Star Trek. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yep.
And hence splitting up the show so that we can have more room to talk about other things. So, and speaking of talking about other things, perhaps we should get into our main topic, kicking off our series on Star Trek The Next Generation, which is celebrating its 35th anniversary this year, 2022. We're starting at the beginning. Can you believe it's 35 years?
I cannot believe it, although I clearly remember tuning in to watch and being thrilled out of my mind. And this will tell you what a big geek I was. Not a surprise that I was, but the next day at school, our English teacher asked if anybody had watched the new Star Trek and how was it. And I started applauding, very...
Oh, that's great.
Right there in front of everyone. Yeah, I was very excited. And I recorded it on my VHS, video recorder. I watched episode at Farpoint, ad nauseum through the fall of 87.
Well, Encounter at Farpoint is... now, you were watching both of them back to back, I guess. Or did they air
I was watching it as the 2-hour episode that it was originally.
They aired as one. That's right.
The last line of part 1, as it's edited, is, if we're going to be damned, let's be damned for who we really are.
Oh, okay.
But McCoy's quite right before. McCoy was before a commercial break in the original airing. And in the edited version, they go straight from McCoy to the first scene back from commercial,
Right.
I don't see any ears on your head, boy, or any points on your ears, boy, but
right.
You sound like a Vulcan.
Yep.
Yes, that wonderful surprise cameo from D. Kelly.
Yeah, that was great. That was absolutely beautiful. I love that scene. And I mean, I watched it just today. I watched the episode again, and it's still one of the most moving things in all of Star Trek for me. It's just it's one of those things that always gets me. I love it.
Well, I'm a little young to have watched Encounter at Farpoint in first run, though I fully believe that I did. However, I was 2 at the time, so I can make no guarantees.
So you don't have clear memories.
Correct.
Of that.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, but I do remember the first time I saw it after having sort of grown up with Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and sort of growing up with the feeling of what Star Trek is, and sort of watching this after all of that, it feels very different. It's almost like, and I think there are many, many reasons for that, which I'm sure we can talk about, but it feels like it has one foot in the original series and one foot in the Next Generation, this episode in particular. And I remember being sort of surprised at how unusual this episode in particular feels when compared to that, when compared to the later episodes, thinking like seasons 5 through 7, basically, feeling such a different show. I not that it's not enjoyable, of course, but it is the first time that I really felt like I was watching a show finding itself. And that was a really interesting. It's really interesting to see that happen on such a grand scale, right? They're pouring so many millions of dollars into this show, and they're basically just winging it for the first 2 years and just hoping that it's watchable, right? As they're trying to figure out what the show is, and that's really interesting. And seeing it start all of it start right here. You see the little threads that they're laying down, and the little pieces here and there, and so like just the way that it all gets sort of put together is just it's fun to watch. And coming back at it as an adult makes it maybe even more surprising from that vantage point.
Well, part of what you're talking about there, though, I mean, I don't know that they're winging it the first 2 years as much as they go in with an idea of what it is, and then that evolves.
That's fair.
As they keep making it. And I think a big part of that is Gene.
Yeah.
Because, Gene's declining health and death are a big part of why Next Generation changed the way it did. And as it should, because, I mean, if you look at what it is in Encounter at Farpoint, that kind of show could not have survived. It could not have persisted because it's just not the kind of thing that the series does later on. It's not, for me, it's not as dramatically credible. And it's still very much, it feels like the original series in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And doing a lot of the things that the original series did, maybe on a grander scale in terms of some of the visual effects that are available to them and that sort of thing. But for the most part, it feels very original series for a lot of it. Now, I think doing like the courtroom scene and all that sort of thing, even like the destruction of the Bandy City, it's like, oh hey, it's Planet Hell. How are you doing? Like there's a cyclorama behind everything, and and it just it looks like a model. It doesn't. It looks it's fine. But it was 1987, and they're figuring out how a lot of things work. I feel like the saucer separation feels really shoved into the episode,
right?
Because they wanted to get it in while they had
that
ILM.
Way is the music. I think they, instead of putting the score that Dennis McCarthy composed for that sequence, they put in the main title theme again, which wasn't the main title he composed either. I mean, they were intent on having Goldsmith's TMP theme in.
Yeah, which was weird.
It's that saucer separation sequence is just.
Which, in fairness, it is beautiful and iconic, and like it fits.
It's gorgeous.
It fits, especially in hindsight. But I agree that it doesn't necessarily fit that moment.
It brings the pacing just to
right.
Dead falls, even though it's
it's really long. Well, and of course, also this was originally going to be just a single 45-minute episode. It wasn't going to be a double-length episode, so it was extended. And so there are places like that where I feel like there is kind of filler a little bit to get us through the episode. But also, this is a big epic thing that we're seeing for the first time, kind of like the Enterprise and Dry Dock in the motion picture. But also, it gave them, they wanted to do this throughout the series because they were going to do it in the original series and they couldn't because of budget or whatever. But they had ILM for this episode. And so they wanted to use, that ILM, that ILM magic to create this and then reuse it. But it ended up being something they couldn't really reuse that much anyway.
Right.
So because because of other things they would have to reshoot and do new photography of and so yeah, it's a weird sequence. It doesn't feel like it does anything. Like I get that they're saving that, like, okay, you're getting the people out of harm's way, which we'll never do again in the series.
Right.
Like, that was too much trouble, guys. Let's just risk the whole thing.
You knew what you were signing up for when you brought your family along.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah, so they did that, and but then, like, with the torpedoes, it's like, what was that? Like, it was supposed to like cover up the saucer separation or something, or blind them to the saucer separation, but they do it well after the saucer separation happens.
Yeah,
and it's just these few explosions that go off randomly, and it's like, well, I guess that worked. Like, I don't know what that was.
The battle bridge. We only see the battle bridge a few
weird.
More times in the whole series.
Right, right. Well, for just that reason, we don't do the saucer separation. So, yeah, it was really interesting.
Well,
but it was still cool,
Yeah,
but
and in the vein of like things that don't necessarily feel weird when you come at it sort of backwards, like I did. The bridge also kind of feels like. When you go into the wrong classroom in like elementary school, where it's like, generally speaking, it's still a classroom and it's still like the walls are all the same and everything, but everything's just arranged differently. And so like those weird brown panels on the side instead of like the little lockers that they have throughout most of the series, and the fact that the chairs at ops and navigation are like reclined back 45 degrees, comfortable.
They changed that right quick for season 2, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Yep. And the chairs, even the command chair and everything is different. And I was even noticing, you talk about those lockers and everything. Well, those aren't lockers. They're panels, and obviously there's nothing behind them. But Mike Okuda was talking, shared something, I think on Twitter the other day or Instagram, one of the two, where he was talking about how he used to use tape
I saw
for detailing on the sets.
Oh, yeah.
And I realized, they're sitting in front of the that big arch, at the back of the bridge. And if I was a better nerd, I'd know what to call it. But it's right behind the command chair is that bit that comes up, that support that comes up in the middle of it. And man, that looks weird. It looks so flat and so like bright behind Patrick Stewart's head. And then I realized it's because it doesn't have Mike Okuda's tape on it. It doesn't have his little tape details, because he hadn't been allowed to do that yet. And because he had to he had to convince the producers to do this, that this was going to work.
Yeah.
That, yes, putting tape on things as detail was going to work. And now it's all over.
Right.
It's all over everything that Mike did.
Become part of the aesthetic of Star Trek in general, almost.
Yeah, yeah.
I will say about the 1701D bridge, if you look at the concept art for it, they really hewed very close as they could to the earliest sketches of that bridge, where it's this very spacious, relaxed, comfortable place. And Gene Roddenberry talked about this ethic of this aesthetic, of technology unchained, meaning it would be all around us and part of our lives, but unobtrusive. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that in some in some of the tech we have today. But TNG really envisioned that, and so the bridge is. I agree with you, David, but I also. I'll just say this. When they showed us that bridge in Kobayashi in Prodigy a few weeks ago, I was surprised how emotional it made me feel to kind of be back on that bridge. And didn't Lower Decks also use that bridge when there was an episode where Boimler was...
He was doing the
red
simulation
shirts.
with the Borg and stuff,
yeah. So that bridge... feels like, it feels like home. If I was going to choose any bridge to be on, I'd probably want to go to the Star Trek II era bridge of the original Enterprise. But a close second would be the Enterprise D bridge, because it does, as I say, it kind of feels like home to me. I've never been on a set or anything like it, but it feels comfortable and familiar and nice to be there.
Yeah. Well, it's Enterprise D hands down for me. Without question. And in fact, that's one of the things that I don't like about the way things progress in the films, is that we get the Enterprise E, which I get that they're like, we're at war with the Borg and, we're making these meaner, leaner ships, but everything feels boxier and tighter and just not home.
My understanding of the reason for that is actually a production reason, is that the Enterprise D bridge was just not designed for motion pictures.
That's right.
And not only just the fact that it was designed for a lower resolution and didn't necessarily photograph as well, but even just the aspect ratio of the room, if that makes any sense. It's a taller room, and especially with that bi-level sort of look that they've got with the tactical arch and everything, that just it feels a lot more cramped if you try to squeeze that down into a widescreen image, or you have just dead space at the sides where there's not anything interesting going on. It's made for shooting on television aspect ratio 4:3, versus if you look at the Enterprise E bridge, it's much more spread out horizontally, to where yes, there are still things happening at different levels, but there's more stuff going on at the sides as well. And so I think that was the big reason why they did that. I love the Enterprise E out exterior, but I agree that the bridge just never did it for me as much as the D bridge did. Yeah.
Well, I agree, and hey, I understand that stuff from a production standpoint and all that, but it's still. Hey, we did the Enterprise D bridge for one movie.
Right.
Come on, it worked.
Well, but even then they had to add stuff on the sides.
Yeah,
there's
which is
stations
fine.
there that you never saw on the TV show.
Right, which is fine. So just leave it that way, as far as I'm concerned. But oh well.
Yeah.
Nobody asked me. That was a long time ago. But anyway, so into the episode. The episode itself. We have Jean-Luc Picard getting onto the Enterprise for the first time and taking command of this vessel for the first time. And I think there are certain things about his character that are meant to be a bit uncomfortable and a bit off-putting for us. The way he receives Riker, his thing about being uncomfortable with children and all that sort of thing. There's a sort of emotional stuntedness to Picard when we get into this series that we don't see later on, that he grows out of, I guess. There's and that's true of a lot of this episode that makes it feel weird, is there's discomfort. Even when Geordi goes up to Riker to tell him something, and he's like, "Is this an official report?" Like, "Oh, sorry, let me stand at attention." When did anybody ever do that before or since?
And when did Riker ever care ever again.
Oh,
right.
exactly.
Riker would be the last person to care about that kind of thing.
Well, once he grew the beard, he would be the last person to care about that kind of thing. See, before the beard, he was just like as straight laced as anything. So
well, though maybe that does ring as kind of true, though. Not in a way that necessarily you want Star Trek to feel, but meeting a new boss, meeting a new group of coworkers, like that does feel weird and awkward. It's uncomfortable. So I guess that feels true, even though it doesn't really fit with the Star Trek ethos, I guess, of everybody being open and honest with one another.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because, Gene wanted such cohesion in the crew.
Yeah.
That to start out with such discomfort and distrust and weirdness, going on. It's interesting. Well, and I like it, actually.
Yeah, but also, like, talking about Gene and his stated values being at odds with the show, he's... And I know we've talked about this in the past, but he's an avowed secular person, and he starts off this television series that's supposed to be this lasting testament to his it's his magnum opus, basically, and he starts it off with a story about God. That's an interesting path to go on, and I think it's I like the fact that he's willing to wrestle with his own values in that way, and try to pin them down.
What do you mean in terms of a story about God? You mean Q?
I mean Q, yeah.
Well,
and I mean more broadly, a story about a higher power who is unknowable by scientific means and who has some sort of I don't want to say judgment, because that is what Q is doing, but it's not what God is doing per se, but who has something to say about the conduct of humanity.
Well, see, I don't think it's odd at all. And, you talk about Gene being avowedly secular. I mean, yes, that's true in terms of religion, but I mean, I don't know if you've read my book, but...
Like I said, I know we've talked about this before.
Ouch.
But I do spend 4 chapters establishing that Gene Roddenberry was not an atheist.
Yes, that's why I said secular person.
And discussing the theism of Roddenberry.
Yes,
I know,
yes.
I'm picking on you. But no, I mean, it's true that I think it's very Gene, to do this. And in fact, there's a story from the animated series, when David Gerrold was working on the episode Bem, which is one of my favorites, and the idea of this like God being on the planet where they go to, which is in the episode anyway, that was Gene's idea, David has said, when Gene didn't know what to do with the story, he just had Kirk get in a fight with God, and he said, and he said that Gene had said, well, suppose we go out into space and they meet God, and David had said, well, David thought to himself, haven't we kind of done that before? It's kind of a recurring theme in Star Trek. And so the fact that Q exists, I mean, he's a lot of people have said that Trelane from the original series, from the Squire of Gothos, is actually a Q, because he's the same kind of being. I mean, he uses technology somehow, so that's a little wonky with that.
Right.
But in fact, there's a novel actually, I think, that says that he is a Q. But the idea that Q represents a God figure. Let's not say he tells a story about God,
right?
Necessarily, but Q is a God figure, a God-like figure, but is a being who is very powerful and very, I think, specifically meant to embody the kind of God in which Gene disbelieved, which is a God who is a person, first of all.
Right.
And secondly, the God who functions as a judge, who is monitoring you and watching you and judging all your actions and ready to push the button and send you to hell at any moment. Right? So
and that's
that
fair.
was something that he... Exactly. I disbelieve in that God too, except for the personhood part. I do believe that God is a person.
Right.
But I definitely disbelieve in that part. But I thought about that this particular time through, when he shows up as the 17th century captain, right? and he starts speaking in this sort of Elizabethan type English, and he says, "Go back, or thou shalt most certainly die." And I thought of Genesis.
Yeah.
And I thought of God saying, "In the day that you eat the fruit of that tree, you shall surely die."
Yeah.
You know, Gene's imagination, I think, circled back to Genesis, circled back to Eden quite a lot.
Yeah.
And there are several episodes throughout the original series, and Star Trek writers did too. I mean, they kind of picked up on this thread, because it's not just Gene writing this stuff, for sure. But there's several episodes of the original series that name check Eden and use Edenic imagery and Edenic themes, and also in the movies, in the original Crew movies. So that felt like a bit of a callback in that sense. And I think it is kind of an image of humanity sort of standing up to this judgmental God figure and saying, "No, you don't understand us. We won't be defined by our past mistakes. We can be better. We can do better. You know, test us, and let's show you who we really are." And in fact, as you quoted the line earlier, Mike, you know, Picard even uses the biblical or somewhat biblical language. If we're going to be damned, let's be damned for what we really are.
Yeah.
There's definitely that sense of being punished for sin in this episode. And we've had that before in Star Trek and in other episodes. So I find that fascinating, and I'm curious as to you guys' take on that.
No, I agree.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the punishment aspect, but I thought you were going to bring that line up again to say that, you know, there's this insistence on the integrity of humanity and being unapologetic for being human in the face of that kind of God figure who's judging and out to condemn and accusing, you know. Of course, the accuser in the Bible is Satan, right? So
yeah, that's true, and there's a sense in which Q kind of straddles that line. He straddles a lot of lines, but that's one of the lines he straddles is like, you know, God and the devil. You know, which one is he?
Right.
Is he a judge or a tempter, or is he a companion? What, you know, what is he?
Is he guide or accuser?
Yes, and he plays all three of those roles actually in this episode. Yeah. You know, as someone who is, you know, by the end of the episode, he's doing his thing that he does, which is kind of helping us out. You know, and kind of letting us win the game, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Even though we do totally earn it at the same time.
Does
I think he does. Yeah.
How? Maybe I'm not remembering.
Well, I feel like at the end of it, you know, when he's like, you know, I see now that it was too simple a puzzle. Generosity has always been my weakness.
He's making excuses. You know? He's not. No,
well,
I don't think he's actively involved in the solution of the mystery in any way.
No, he's not actively involved in the solution. You're right. But I just get the sense from him at the end of the episode that he's, you know, and maybe
he's
I'm
been
reading
beaten
into
and
it.
he knows it, is what I think. And I think this plays to what you were saying earlier about Gene Roddenberry and his views of you know, of God figures, that he wanted to show us a story where, again, humanity in its integrity and going about the business of being human unapologetically shows up God.
Well, shows up what I would say is a version of God, because
a version of God.
Yeah,
yes,
this particular version, this particular idea of what a God could be. Yeah.
Yes.
Because the God in which Gene believed was the God that was exemplified by the crew in this episode, which is that we human beings are ourselves divine and are part of the divine, which is both in us and beyond us, you know, and something that we are evolving into.
And that goes back to what Kirk was saying in Star Trek V, was it? That, you know, God is within each of us.
The human heart. Yeah, which is the closest thing, one of the closest things to Gene Roddenberry's actual theology that's ever shown up in Star Trek. Yeah. So I find that interesting. Yeah, okay, you're probably right. Yeah, I'm probably giving Q a little bit too much credit at the end of the episode. I just feel a little bit of that smirk in him.
He definitely has a soft spot for humanity, or at least for Picard.
Yes, that's what I'm feeling at the end of the episode.
Maybe
it's just me.
I can't say you feel wrong.
It's the look on Delancey's face. It's the look on Delancey's face when it's all being resolved, and he's saying, "Generosity has always been my weakness." Like, I feel like
he's talking out his bottom.
He might be, but I feel like he's also kind of a little bit proud of them for getting through it.
We do know that he becomes interested in Riker supposedly during that whole business, and we could talk about that episode some other time. But
right.
So I think, and we can talk about this more broadly too later this year. That Q certainly evolves as a character.
Yes, he does
throughout the series. But I think the Farpoint Q is a false god to be knocked down, as Star Trek is good at doing, and is appropriately humbled in the word, and turns out to be not that much of a threat, really, because when humanity goes about being humanity, there is no condemnation.
Right.
To riff a little bit on biblical language,
right.
And Picard doesn't seem particularly troubled when Q does the equivalent of sticking his head back in the drawer on his way out, but don't forget I'll be watching, oh yeah, whatever. It's just, Q has been shown up to be the Wizard of Oz, basically,
right.
by the end of this episode.
He becomes kind of
nothing
toothless.
to be afraid of.
Yeah, he becomes kind of toothless by the end of the episode, which I think is great.
Absolutely.
And I think is particularly good. And again, this can be seen as sort of this assertion of atheism kind of thing, which it isn't. It's maybe,
no, I get you. Yeah.
It's maybe atheistic toward a particular theos, but not toward any form of theos. And
it's knocking down a false image.
But it is knocking down a false image, and I think it is specifically aimed toward, among other things, a particular view of God that has emerged in some form in some parts of Christian culture.
Yeah.
And I think we should join Gene Roddenberry in wanting to see that image knocked down, because it's not correct.
Oh, for sure.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Mike, you did talk about Q growing throughout the course of the series, and I don't think you're wrong, and I also agree that probably this is not the right time to talk about it, but I do think you can't really talk about Encounter at Farpoint and not talk about the fact that they used Q very intentionally, maybe not now, but by the end, to bookend the series. They very intentionally use him in the final episode. And I'm intrigued to hear what your thoughts are on Q as the bookend, not only the bookend of like, starting off the series and ending the series, but also he has a very key part to play in maybe the most memorable part of the series, where introducing the Borg, and which leads to Picard being assimilated. He is a being of great consequence within the show, and I think that all starts here. And so I'm intrigued to hear what you guys think about the bookends of Next Generation, as it were, or at least the first one.
Well, number one, I think it's a brilliant creative move for them to bookend the series with Q.
For sure.
And I think there's lots of episodes where Q shows up, and each time he's introduced, the writers are examining a different aspect of what people believe about God in some way, shape, or form. And I think that would be a really fruitful topic for us to discuss later in the 35th anniversary year, because there's a lot to talk about.
So what were they talking? Yeah. What were they examining in this episode?
Well, I think we've talked about it. I think we've talked about this idea that God is only out to judge us and accuse us, and that humanity, in its integrity of being human, is enough to rebut that and refute that, and to prove that wrong, and to knock that image of God off its pedestal.
And that comes to, I think, a really core Star Trek idea, which I think a lot of Christians are going to have a lot of trouble with, which I think, coming from this kind of post-Christian worldview that Gene Roddenberry had, I think a big sticking place for him with religion, and with Christian religion in particular, this is the sense that I get from him. I don't know that I can point to him saying it this on the nose, but the sense that I do get is that the idea of Christian religion, or the kind of Christian religion in which he came up, which is West Texas, 1930s Baptist, and later California, but still conservative Baptist, is the idea that humanity at its core is sinful.
Yeah.
That the thing to know about humanity is that it's broken, and that it's wrong, and that it's bad, and that there's something that that we don't have any merit on our own at all. And Gene likes to say, we have things to be proud of as human beings. No, ancient astronauts did not build the pyramids. Human beings built them because they're clever and they work hard. And Star Trek is about those things. And so I can't say I disagree with Gene on that. And I do think that Christian religion, in many sections of its existence, and perhaps over a large portion of its history, has focused so much on our brokenness, so much on our sinfulness, and I don't want to say it's not there. It's obviously there. But has defined us by that so much that it's missed, David, one of your favorite topics, the Imago Dei, right. the image of God that is in us, even as broken as it is, even as marred and fractured and whatever as it is, right? That we are still made in the image of God. We are still bearers of the image of God. And that matters, and that contributes to, and is the reason for, I think from a Christian perspective, there are things that we have as humans to be proud of. And that we should be proud of those things, and that we should be glad for those things, and that God's role in our lives is not to hold us down and tell us how bad we are, but to show us how to flourish in spite of how bad we are, and that there is redemption and salvation, and that we shouldn't be dragged down by the things that we do wrong, that we should be able to move past them, because God has given us the pathway and the love and the ability to do that. So to me, that's a more balanced view than either saying, and in fact, even in this episode, Picard has to admit, that humanity has been terrible. We have done terrible things. The idea, of course, or the sort of premise of his argument is humanity has moved beyond those things. We're no longer a dangerous, savage child race. I don't know that that's true. I think perhaps we can imagine a future where there is, a humanity that lives more in the better parts of its being, right? That does a better job of being the image of God. We should always be working for that, towards that, for sure.
Isn't that what Star Trek is?
That's what Star Trek is. That's what it's about being the better version of ourselves, and that there's hope that we can be the better version of ourselves. But I would also say that the Star Trek narrative, as the writing has gone on, has had to admit that it's hard to recognize people as human when they don't have any frailty, and when they don't have any problems.
When they're
and I don't think
godlike.
we can. And I don't think we can ever say, well, now it's the 25th century, so we're like perfect,
right?
That's never going to work. And the more Gene tried, I think, to push that narrative and tell those stories, the less successful it was. And so it's that's a thing that really bothered him. He used to talk about that he had two Star Treks. The Star Trek that's on TV and his Star Trek Dream World. The Star Trek Dream World is where everything is perfect. And then there's the Star Trek for TV, and I've said this before on the show, that has all the the fist fights and the and the excitement and adventure and sexiness and all those things to sell toothpaste.
Right.
We've got to have our people sitting and watching the stories so that we can keep having a show.
Right.
So, but that's the interesting thing about this episode. I feel like it's not a fault of the episode, that there's a certain level of what I would call advancement or ethical thinking, I guess, that we don't see so much later on in Star Trek, which is how decidedly nonviolent the Enterprise is. They do fire photon torpedoes. It's pointless,
right?
But they do fire them, and it's supposed to be just to create, to blind them or something, to blind the queue or something, which is dumb. Right? But that's the only ordnance we see fired, for the most part, from the ship. And then any other time we don't see the phasers being used, even when the phaser's used, and it's on a stun setting.
Right.
or it's being used to free Groppler Zorn from the torment that he's in, the torture chamber thing, energy bubble that he's in. And then when the Enterprise uses its phasers, it's sending an energy beam down to the planet, and they're even wanting to, and Q stops them from this, which I think is kind of stupid of Q, and kind of doesn't make sense as to why. I feel like Q's trying to stack the cards against them at the end of the thing when he realizes they might actually win this thing. He's trying to, paint them into a corner so that they can't operate their ship, because they want to put the ship in between the alien and the Bandy City to try to help the people in the Bandy City, which I don't know why it took them so long to come to that idea. But they're willing to sacrifice themselves. Yeah. And I feel like they go to great efforts to be nonviolent, and I feel like we fail at that a great deal in Star Trek later on down the line. And I feel like Star Trek isn't as nonviolent, or our methods aren't as nonviolent as they should be here on out. Am I right in that, or am I just is this episode just too idealistic to be perpetuated? I don't know.
Well, I think it's just hard to tell dramatic stories on television that don't have violence, unfortunately.
Agreed. And this episode has violence, but our
very
tactics,
limited and very mild, as you say, though.
Well, mild. They're killing people in the city on the
that's
the
not
planet,
violence we're perpetrating. Though.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like there can be violence in the story. We don't have to perpetuate it. We can try. I don't always know that we try as hard as we should to be nonviolent later on compared to this episode. I feel like this episode sets the bar pretty high for that. Okay.
I mean, I remember watching Deep Space Nine, complaining, it's so much like Star Wars, it's so militaristic. Now, I've revised my opinion of that some with a rewatch, but at the time, I sure felt like it's cool, but it's not quite Star Trek somehow.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I feel like there is a sort of, it does exist in this sort of pocket that doesn't last very long of a kind of an idealized version of Star Trek. That probably can't last. I think maybe is it naive, or is it just not making good stories? I don't know.
Or is it harder? And so
harder to write
because look at Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It's in that same pocket. It's like pure uncut Star Trek,
right?
And it didn't do as well. It did well in the theaters, but for a long time it was the motionless picture and all those jokes, but. That thing's getting a 4K restoration this year of the director's cut, from 20. I mean, that thing has held up, and it continues to grow fans, and people continue to appreciate it and find new meaning in it. And so, it's probably harder to make as close to pure Star Trek as we can. As though I'm working on the thing, but it's harder, but it might be worth it in the end, and maybe there's some lessons there for us. In the Christian life, I mean, Jesus didn't say his way would be easy. Right. He told his disciples it would be hard at several points. But is it worth it? Yes. I mean, yes, I believe we're saved by grace, but the more we put ourselves in grace's way, the more grace we experience, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think also, like, you're talking about the motion picture, which is probably not very well looked upon by most fans, but thinking about maybe one of the most beloved Star Trek episodes, Darmok, like that one, fighting back is very clearly presented as the wrong choice throughout.
Yeah.
I don't think you're wrong to express that like when maybe almost when violence has to happen, it's a failure. Being presented as maybe a macro theme of the whole franchise.
Yeah, and I think that would be good, and we do. I think we aim at that a lot. I don't know, we always hit it, but at the same time, I can't name a lot of times when I felt like a story that caused us to fire phasers or whatever, that we acted in a way that was unethical or what have you. But maybe things, it's kind of like we talked about with Boimler trying to save all the Borg in his simulation. Maybe there are lengths to which we could go that we don't always go. So there is a little bit of an ideal in this episode, and it's interesting too that this episode is is launching this whole journey of this whole crew. You know, in the original series, we didn't have that.
Right.
Like, we still had to form things, you know, and in the early episodes, you can see the writing coming together, right?
Right.
But it's not like day one of Kirk on the Enterprise.
Right.
You know, it's not, oh, hi, what's your name? Oh, I'm Spock. You know, like,
Yeah.
You know, so it's really interesting to put us in that particular pocket of starting something. And I guess that's why this series feels, and Deep Space Nine does this too, you know, and that they're throwing our characters together for the first time. And we get to see their relationships really build and develop, and I like that. I like that aspect of this episode.
All of the '90s
very
Trek
much.
shows do that. I'm just thinking Next
Yeah.
Generation, DS9,
Voyager does
Voyager, Enterprise.
Well, even in Enterprise, you know, Archer has to gather his crew.
And like there's some
So
people
I guess
they knew
it's-
beforehand, but like for the most part, they're yeah.
Well, I was really just meaning from the original series to this one.
Right.
It was kind of a new idea for
It
Star
is,
Trek
yeah,
at the
no, for
time.
sure.
Anyway,
One that they've stuck to is what I'm trying to say, though.
yeah, right, yeah, no, it has, and that's the thing about Next Generation is that it planted so many seeds and began so many things. You know, we wouldn't still. I really believe we wouldn't still have Star Trek if it wasn't for Next
Oh, for
Generation.
sure. Yeah.
Oh, no doubt. No argument
really
here.
would.
There's a reason we call it the TNG
And,
era.
Mm-hmm. Right, because they started
Mhm.
it and really defined it. You know, they defined that whole 20-year span. Well, 18, but still,
Right.
20-year span of Star
Yeah.
Trek. Very much so. Very much so. It's great because it starts the Next Generation journey, and there's so much that is instigated here and initiated here with Data and with Jean-Luc and Beverly's relationship, with Will and Deanna's relationship. You know, so many things
Wesley.
that are established. Yeah, oh yeah, and Wesley. There's so many things that are established in this episode that are mulled on and thought about all the way into the movies, and that's really great. I mean, even though there are things in the episode that I think don't work so well from a writing standpoint, or at least haven't aged well, you gotta, you know, give it credit for having, you know, established so much of what makes this series and this crew what it is. Even though things, like we said, feel a little awkward at the beginning.
And this franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure it won't be the last time we talk about it this year. Just because this is
Not
our
even
Farpoint
close.
episode, we'll be referencing back to it.
We'll
as we
be
go
coming back
along.
to
So
Farpoint.
If anybody out there hasn't watched it,
Yeah.
watch it so we have a common frame of reference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then go on to The Naked Now, and then go on to, you know.
Oh boy. So I think it is probably time for us to move on to our audience feedback section.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at our audience feedback this week, you know, several of you have contacted me and you told me some great stuff about how you're enjoying the episodes, and we really appreciate that. Keep bringing that stuff in. We love it. One of you said, "Your show is a blessing to me. You are helping to restore my faith," and that is like that makes us really happy.
That's happy and humbling, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And they also talked about the show helping them to think about viewing everybody as people whom God loves.
Oh, awesome.
Even people who are not easy to love because they are family members who are difficult to get along with, or because they're people who are very public, you know, in doing things that are not helpful and are not kind. It can be really easy, and looking at even those people and saying that those people are worthy of love, or they're at least needy of love, right? And that all of us get God's love, and all of us need God's love, and that and trying to find ways to be more loving to those people. I think that's really important.
Well, and if you're struggling with this or something, we do too. This is not something that comes easy, at least to me. I guess I can't speak for Mike or Kevin, but given their reactions, I suppose that much is clear. But seeing people as holders of the Imago Dei, as people made in the image of God, is difficult. particularly in a hyper-polarized time, particularly in a time where it seems like everybody's missing connections and not seeing each other well. It's hard to do. And I mean, maybe Star Trek helps me do that. Maybe Encanto helps me do that. Maybe, all of the various different things that in culture. But I think going back to some of the things that we've been talking about in this episode, being able to see a better version of humanity that is able to do that maybe a little bit better than I can, does give me hope for the future, and also remind me of maybe my place in that future, of what it would take from me to get us a little bit closer to that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot in Star Trek about hope for the future, but I think, what you're describing there is very true, and it's not just hope for the future, but it's hope for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's hope for our present. It's hope that there's a future that we can make and that we can leave behind because of who we are now.
And that we belong in that future.
Yes. And that it's not just a future that we get to through the passage of time, but we get to through the work of being better humans, and that there is something, I think, that gives us something to work for, something to work toward. We talked recently about the idea of shalom and the completion and the fullness of our being as people in community with one another and with God, and at peace with the entirety of creation. And the idea that that's out there, I mean, that can feel very out of our grasp.
Yeah.
Very cosmic.
Yeah.
And I think something like Star Trek helps give us something a little more concrete, a little more real, that we can put our hands on and say, yeah, like that.
I think maybe it even more so helps us to see that, like, we can attain the cosmic.
Right. Yeah, like if we can imagine something that takes that sort of thing that is so cosmic and is so big and puts it in a package that we can actually see and hear and relate to, then maybe it can be applicable to our real lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's great.
And that we can, attaining it, not meaning that like it is within our grasp necessarily, but that the God who is behind it is actually actively seeking us out.
Right. And that there is a foretaste, if you will,
there you go. That's a good one.
that we can have now of things that are greater than we can have, but we can have some piece of it. We can have some part
First
of it.
fruits.
Yeah. Right. So thanks for that comment,
Yes.
and thank you.
Honored.
So many of you sent. Yes, and thank you all of you who send us your thoughts and your feelings about the show. We appreciate it so much. And
if you'd like to bring in your own feedback, listen to the end of the show for the email address.
that's right. That's great. All right. So, David, what do we got coming up next episode?
Next episode, we are talking about Season 1, Episode 9 of Star Trek Prodigy, A Mortal Star Part 1.
Just after we get done talking about the TNG two-parter, we got a two-parter from Prodigy coming up.
That's right, yeah.
So I hope everyone will join us for that. And in the meantime, please like and subscribe, comment and share. And if you like what we're hearing, please write a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about the show and let us know how we're doing.
And please do keep sending us your feedback. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook, or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to feature your comments and questions on the show.
Also, you can support the show by using the support button on anchor.fm/GATST. You can support the show, help us make good content, and get some cool perks as well.
And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and until next time.
I'm David Atwell.
And I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin C. Neese, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.